I'm Frank Vaughn. It's June 6, 2025. Diane, if you see this, send me a normal email. We're going to start out today with something lighthearted that wouldn't even normally feature in one of my videos. However, it is a trending news article on CBC right now on their website. And since we all pay for it, I thought we should have a laugh together. This is a movie review, which is one of the most important things going on this morning, apparently. The Ritual with Al Pacino is dreary, dumb, and dangerous, and misogynistic. Also, it sucks. Al Pacino, that exorcism thriller, teaches a vile lesson in a trite and callous fashion. Having made it to the end of this offensive mess, I can only assume that debate is a reference to the fact that the Ritual believes you're an evil imbecile if you disagree with the practice of exorcism. Thank you, CBC, for the movie recommend. Now on to more serious matters. Let's just look at some of the bills that have been proposed in this very brief sitting of the House and try to get some accurate information. This isn't going to be an overly popular one, I imagine, because I have to offer a bit of a counterpoint to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, an organization I very much respect. If Bill C-2 passes, it will become a criminal code offense for businesses, professionals, and charities to accept cash donations, deposits, or payments of $10,000 or more in cash, even if the $10,000 payment or donation is broken down into several smaller cash transactions. It will still be a crime for a business or charity to receive it. Right out the gate, that first paragraph is not entirely accurate, and far from me wanting to defend the Liberal government, that's not what I'm trying to do here, but we need to be accurate. It's $10,000 in cash per 24-hour period. You can't have multiple subsequent $10,000 donations received by certain individual organizations, so professionals, charities, and businesses, within a 24-hour period. You can still have $10,000 a day structured to go in multiple days if that's what you so choose to do. The legislation does not ban multiple payments. It just bans them over a certain period of time. This is similar to Quebec's Bill 54, adopted in March 2024, which empowers police to presume that any person carrying $2,000 or more in cash must have obtained it as the proceeds of crime. Police can seize the money, and the citizen must prove his or her innocence to get it back. That's terrible. This is happening in the United States in various of the individual states, and forgive my throat. Turns out it wasn't smoke. Turns out I have a bit of a cold. Not a big deal. And that's a terrible idea. Criminalizing people just for possession of cash is not great, but we have talked on this channel about the vast scale of money laundering that's going on here in Canada. Particularly in BC, under Ebby's watch, there were times where people would walk into casinos with $250,000 in cash and just dump it through the casino as an easy means to launder money. Now, if you actually want to deal with money laundering, I'm not sure what you expect that to look like on the part of the government. There's a lot of talk about the government wanting to go through your mail and having more power to open your packages as they're moving through transit. Well, as it sits right now, as I've shown on this channel, you can go to various websites and you can order cocaine, you can order ketamine, you can order the hard drug of your choice. And one of their advertising features on these websites, selling cartel narcotics, is that Canada Post guarantees the delivery because your mail is secure from any and all search and seizure. If you want to stop the mail order trafficking of hard drugs in Canada, you're going to have to open some mail. Right? I don't necessarily trust the Liberal government with that kind of power. But again, I'm not sure what you expect a crackdown to look like. It's probably going to equal more enforcement power. Now, further in this post, I can't really call it an article. It's kind of an article. And again, I love this organization. Restricting the use of cash is a dangerous step towards tyranny and totalitarianism. Cash gives citizens privacy, autonomy, and freedom from surveillance by governments and by banks, credit card companies, and other corporations. If we cherish our privacy, we need to defend our freedom to choose cash in the amount of our choosing. This includes, for example, our right to pay $10,000 cash for a car or donate $10,000 or more to a charity. Unfortunately, the bill doesn't stop either of those activities from happening. It just stops $10,000 any more than $10,000 to certain organizations in a 24-hour period. You can still donate $10,000 a day if you like. And by the way, anytime you engage in a financial transaction like that, a person-to-person transaction, so if I'm selling a used car for 20 grand to another private individual, the bill doesn't ban that. We can still do that trade. Now, what's going to happen? If we take our cash and we go to a bank, which is also exempt from this, and we deposit our 20 grand, the bank is going to file a FinTrack report. And we've talked about FinTrack on this channel and how ineffective they are at their mandate in spite of a huge budget and many employees. I believe it's either one prosecution that they've actually brought successfully or it's zero. I can't remember if it's 0 or 1, but it's very low for their entire mandate. A lot of money's being wasted on FinTrack, but the fact is, if you make a deposit at a bank for larger than $10,000, you're getting reported to FinTrack anyway. If you deposit money to a crypto exchange or you sell crypto and you withdraw money in excess of $10,000, you're going to get a FinTrack report. Same as if you buy or sell gold or silver or other commodities, you're being reported to FinTrack already anyway. But there's no bar in the legislation between two private individuals engaging in large cash transactions. You could argue that's a hole if their intent is to limit cash. Law enforcement already has the tools to fight crime. Perhaps they need a bigger budget to hire more people, or perhaps they need to use existing tools more effectively. In a free society, violating our right to use cash is not the answer. I don't know how you deal with money laundering if you don't put limits on the very institutions, whether it's lawyers, professional financial firms, casinos, and their ability to take large cash transactions and launder them. Again, I'm not trying to defend the liberal government. I don't trust the liberal government at all with these kinds of power. I don't trust them with any powers. I don't trust them as enforcers of the law. But that brings up another point. This post talks about law enforcement already having the tools. Very true. The issue isn't law enforcement anymore in this country. It is the judiciary. It is the justice system, and it is the political system that's entirely corrupt. Law enforcement has the tools, but if they don't have the backing of the judiciary and the political structure, then all of their efforts are wasted. Just like we find people who are getting arrested for violent crimes and being turned loose the same day so that they can reoffend. Now, Bill C2 does put a toe in the door towards this notion of banning cash transactions. Mark Carney is trying to align us with the European Union, and in many respects, the European Union is far advanced in their war on cash. I believe cash transactions in the EU are limited to 1,000 euros. That's off the top of my head from memory. Things could change. There could be specific issues, but I do know that the EU's anti-cash regime is far more advanced than the Canadian one, and you could argue that this is a foot in the door and that limits may be lowered. But just to put a bow on this, the bill is called the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. We've talked about how widespread that is here in Canada. If a group of politicians, if any government, whether it's conservatives or liberals, actually want to do something about this, they're probably going to have to change the law to give themselves increased capacity to keep an eye on things. Single or linked transactions accepting cash payments, deposits, or donations of $10,000 or more in a single transaction or multiple related transactions within 24 hours that total $10,000 or more. This targets structured transactions designed to evade reporting, so multiple single transactions over the course of a single day versus multiple transactions posted over multiple days. You can restructure the way that cash goes in. Third-party deposits prohibits entities like credit unions, security dealers, or money services business from accepting cash deposits of $10,000 or more from anyone other than an account holder or an authorized person, except in prescribed circumstances, not yet defined in the regulations, so you're going to have to keep your eye on that one. This closes loopholes used by launderers to deposit illicit cash through intermediaries. So if you are the individual account holder, if the cash that's being used is in your name, you're exempt from this. This has to do with individuals who are not linked to the account putting money in the account. Business and professional activities applies to businesses, professionals, and charities vulnerable to money laundering, such as those handling large cash payments for services, goods, or donations. For example, a real estate broker or precious metals dealer accepting large cash payments would be restricted. What the government seems to be trying to do here is restricting the means by which terrorist financiers, cartel drug sellers can rinse their money successfully and get it digitized. So they're cutting access points. Remember the dispute with Donald Trump over the export of drugs to the United States, money laundering. Remember my reports on the internationally recognized scale of criminal enterprise in Canada, calling Canada a glorified northern narco state, which is what we are. Now, if we intend to do anything about it, it's going to look something like this. Now, importantly, exemptions from C2. Federally regulated banks are exempt, allowing them to accept cash deposits over $10,000, though they must file a large cash transaction report with FinTrack. Now, FinTrack doesn't have a record of good prosecutions. All of this money laundering nonsense has happened under their watch. They haven't really done much about it, but this is something that's already on the books. Ordinary consumer transactions, private cash sales between individuals are not affected, as the restrictions target reporting entities, not personal cash use. So you are free to use as much cash as you want between individual transactions. I'm not trying to whitewash concerns about the bill. I am just trying to point out that if you're going to do something about money laundering, it's going to look something like this, and there are no restrictions on person-to-person cash transactions in the bill. Let's just be measured in our assessment. Before we examine another piece of legislation that is being proposed, we have to examine this because this is extremely disconcerting.
Chair, does the minister know what an RPAL is?
No, Minister.
I do not.
Member.
Does the minister know what the CFSC is?
No, Minister.
I do not, no.
Member.
I'll stipulate, Chair, that is the Canadian firearm safety course that all gun owners in Canada have to do to get their firearms license. Has the minister ever done the Canadian firearm safety course?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, it's my third week on the job. No, I have not.
The Honourable Member.
Does the minister know what safety classes and safety demands are expected of law-abiding Canadian gun owners?
The Honourable Minister.
This is not about law-abiding gun owners, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member.
It 100% is about law-abiding gun owners. They are the only people the government has power over to regulate firearms. Because by nature and by default, anybody that's committing a gun crime is not obeying the law. Now, an RPAL is a restricted possession and acquisition license, which means that you can own handguns and some other firearms, even though right now most of them are locked in your safes if you own them at all, and you can't take them out. The second you take them out and decide to commit a crime with them, which you won't, because if you did, the penalties, you need to understand this. The penalties for somebody who illegally possesses firearms and goes out and actually shoots up streets and kill people are far more lenient than the penalties for somebody who owns legally acquired firearms who decides to commit a crime. The legal gun owner who decides to break the law is going to probably get a lifetime ban on owning firearms and be given a much stiffer jail sentence because that's the way the laws are designed. So the only people the government has the power to regulate are those who are willing to obey the law in the first place. So it is very much about that. But it should be disconcerting to anybody that this guy doesn't even know what an RPAL is, doesn't understand whatsoever the kinds of courses legal firearms owners have to take in order to have a license, doesn't understand, probably, I'm inferring at this point, the sentencing regime, doesn't understand, likely, if he doesn't understand these basic things, does he understand that CPIC is looking at you every single day, that a legal firearms owner literally has surrendered their privacy, that the Canadian Firearms Office can call you up at any point and demand to search your house and give you 24 hours notice that they're going to come in and have a look at everything that you have? That's what the people who obey the law have to face. And the minister responsible for the file doesn't know that. Looked at another way, here's a recent incident that occurred in Toronto in Olivia Chow's out-of-control city. That is semi-automatic gunfire. And you're going to see come on screen that gun right there. That's a prohibited firearm. You're not allowed to have that. But lo and behold, these gunmen have those guns. You see that magazine that's hanging out of it? That great big, look at how many shots this guy's firing. That magazine is illegal. You can't have that if you are a lawful, legal gun owner. It's not for you. There's no proper firearm safety here. The guy's waving his muzzle all over the place, even at his co-conspirators. None of this is legal. The law can't stop this because the law is targeting people who obey the law, not gangbangers. These people are getting arrested and released on bond. They're not being sentenced to jail. They're being examined. There will be a statement from a mayor somewhere, or at least there usually is, talking about the stigma that these poor men will face, having to deal with the guilt, which they don't have, of doing this crime for the rest of their life. They'll be assessed based on their race. When we peel off the hats and we peel off the hoodies and we see the color of their skin, we won't assess the violent nature of the crime. We'll assess whether or not they faced social stigma or systemic racism or some other nonsense that doesn't matter in the face of the crime. That's what we do in Canada. All the while, the government pisses around, pardon my French, regulating people who obey the law already. And regulate is far too friendly a word to describe what it is they do. It's actually persecuting. Now, moving on to something else. Actually, no, I'm not talking about this guy. Now, if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you understand that Canada has a lot of major problems to try and solve in a very short amount of time, and how impossible I think that task is. And we take the mickey out of the Liberals and the NDP here often enough. We also do our fair share of criticizing of the CPC. You'll be happy to know that one of your Conservative senators, the Honorable Senator Brazeau, let's just remember as we talk about this bill who Brazeau is, he had an opportunity to beat the ever-living heck out of Justin Trudeau before he was Prime Minister. Can you imagine having to live with the fact that you got your butt kicked by Justin Trudeau, all because you lacked the discipline not to get winded? Look at that. My goodness. It's got to be tough. So in fairness, let's just remember Mr. Brazeau's issues. Bill S-203, an act to prohibit the promotion of alcoholic beverages. Yes, this is a Conservative bill that has already passed first reading in the Senate. It will go through the other readings, likely passing and going to the House floor where we might see it, or maybe we won't because maybe nobody will pick it up. This enactment prohibits the promotion of alcoholic beverages subject to specific exemptions. It also provides a regime for administration and enforcement, associated regulation-making powers, and associated offenses and punishments. More government. In a country where we have very loose bail conditions, violent criminals being turned loose everywhere, we have safe supplies, safe injection sites, we have advocates talking about legalized hard drugs everywhere, we have cartels running rampant, laundering money as they get rich, selling death on our streets. Not just our streets, but exporting death to Australia, the United States, Europe, the world. I've read the reports in previous videos. All of my videos are timeless. You should watch them all because they all contain information that remains relevant moment to moment. Senator Brazeau is concerned with the promotion of alcohol. Whereas the consumption of alcoholic beverages has many adverse effects on the health of Canadians and Canadian society more generally, so does eating fast food. So does our youth not being able to get jobs flipping burgers because those jobs are filled by TFWs. Unhealthy food abounds everywhere. There's no warning labels on any of it. You might get a calorie count if you're lucky. Is alcohol now going to become like cigarettes, where it's just all disgusting warning labels all over the thing, as if it actually stops people from doing the thing. What's next? Warning labels on fast food? Whereas these adverse effects impose significant social costs, including healthcare costs, lost productivity costs, and criminal justice costs, among others, as if safe supply, as if decriminalization, as if loose bail conditions don't do all of those things, whereas the revenue generated by the government of Canada and the provincial and territorial governments, because booze in Canada is ridiculously taxed, does not sufficiently offset the social costs attributable to the consumption of alcoholic beverages by Canadians, resulting in an alcohol deficit. Did you know we're running record deficits in Canada? That Mark Carney right now is looking to spend $400+ billion and add a whole pile of debt burden, that our interest costs are just going up by the day, that we're financially broken, that we have a financial deficit that is literally breaking the country, and that the provinces are all, except for Saskatchewan, the wildfires might change that here. We have put a balanced budget on the table, but we still have a huge amount of debt. Those are real deficits. But Brazo is talking about the alcohol deficit. Whereas Parliament believes it is therefore important to introduce measures to reduce the consumption of alcoholic beverages by Canadians, why not just outlaw it? Let's just go all the way. Outlaw smoking. Outlaw cigarettes. Just make sure that crack cocaine is widely available and methamphetamine is widely available and fentanyl is widely available, because why not? And whereas an effective way to reduce the consumption of alcoholic beverages is to restrict the promotion of alcoholic beverages, and in particular to restrict promotion that may appeal to young persons. Where exactly are young people? They're everywhere. They're in arenas. They're online. They watch TV. Seems like a pretty sweeping regulation if your intention is to avoid all alcohol advertising to anybody that might be underage. Meanwhile, that same underage person can decide to get into gender reassignment, can start taking hormones. All they need is one activist doctor and their own signature, absent parental consent, and they can begin the process of self-sterilization. But God forbid they see a alcohol advertisement. Now, therefore, His Majesty, remember we have a king. A king is so important, the Governor General is so important, that references to the king and the majesty permeate every single bill that goes through our commons. I'm told it's ceremonial, but it is literally structural to every single law in this country. Now, therefore, His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons of Canada, enact as follow this bill. This is what your government's up to. And just so you know that I'm not engaging in hyperbole, this is Senate Bill 202, an act to amend the Food and Drugs Act, warning labels on alcoholic beverages. Soon you won't be able to have a brand logo on something that's been around for thousands of years. Your beer will have warning labels, but maybe not so much your fentanyl. Let's see what else they're up to. S2, an act to amend the Indian Act. Let's just go right to the text of the bill. Mark Gold. This enactment amends the Indian Act to provide, among other things, new entitlements to registration in the Indian Register. In response to the challenge of certain provisions of the Act under the Canadian Charter and Rights and Freedoms, and that the persons who have become so entitled also have a right to have their names entered in a banned list maintained at the Department of Indigenous Services. So there's no clean water. There's no property rights. The band chiefs remain largely corrupt. The people's voices are repressed. But more money. That's really what it comes down to. More money. An act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income was introduced just a couple days ago. S206. Isn't it outstanding? They've been busy. Remember, the Senate is 95% Justin Trudeau appointees. This enactment requires the Minister of Finance to develop a national framework to provide all persons over the age of 17 in Canada with access to a guaranteed livable basic income. It also provides for reporting requirements with respect to the framework. Mass-scale welfare. In a nation that doesn't have balanced budgets, that targets industry for destruction, that has punitive taxes out the wazoo for those who can't even buy scratch tickets. 17-year-olds. Outstanding stuff. S205, an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act. Let's go to the bill and just read the introduction. The enactment amends the Corrections and Conditional Release Act to, among other things, require that if a person who is sentenced, transferred, or committed to a penitentiary has disabling mental health issues, they be transferred to a hospital. How's that worked? When we don't keep them in jail. We've closed all the institutions. We've closed all the asylums. We've turned them loose on the streets, largely responsible for the fact that you can't walk down a city street safely. This is a further softening and distancing of the individual from culpability for their crimes. Ensure that a person may only be confined in a structured intervention unit for longer than 48 hours on an order of a superior court, so it makes it harder to do solitary confinement. Oftentimes solitary confinement is about protecting other inmates from violence. So we should make it harder to do that. Allow for the provision of correctional services and plans for release and reintegration into a community to persons from disadvantaged or minority populations by community groups or other similar support services. Once again, the color of your skin reduces your culpability. If you are an identified disadvantaged group, whatever the hell that means, you are not as responsible as the white population, I suppose is what they're saying. Once again, the only discrimination in Canada right now is against those with less skin pigment. Allow for persons who are sentenced to a period of incarceration or parole ineligibility to apply to the court that imposed that sentence for a reduction if there has been unfairness in the administration of their sentence. The only thing you need to know is lighter sentencing. It's difficult to maintain composure in light of the disaster that this nation has become at the street level, in the wake of C-75, in the wake of our tolerance of sterilization of children, in the wake of activism, trying to put the P in LGBTQIA2+, whatever. You see, I'd like to swear sometimes, but I really do try to avoid it. An act to amend the criminal code, independence of the judiciary. What do we got going on here from Kim Pate? The enactment amends the criminal code to give the court discretion to vary the punishment to be imposed in respect of an offense for which the punishment, or different degrees or kinds of punishment, is prescribed in an enactment. It's an assault on any sort of mandatory minimums. It requires the court to consider all available options before imposing a minimum punishment of imprisonment or a period of parole ineligibility under a provision of any act of parliament. Basically saying that the court, the judiciary, which has no accountability under our system, the people can't pull down a judge. They're just there. What they're saying is they want the judge to have power to ignore minimum sentencing or sentencing guidelines in the legislation. Revolutionary courts, anybody? Has anybody read Solzhenitsyn? You might think that's an extreme comparison, but it's like degrees of a common cold. The cold I have now is kind of mild. Sometimes you can have a really bad cold. It's a coronavirus, all the same. It gives a court discretion in the treatment or counseling program that a person who has been found guilty of an offense may attend, and removes the requirement for the Attorney General to give their consent in order to delay sentencing under subsection 722 of the Criminal Code. So, again, less oversight, more discretion in the hands of the judges appointed by the Liberals. It provides that a judge is to take into consideration the recommendation of the jury in setting the period of parole ineligibility for a person who has been found guilty of first or second degree murder. Isn't that outstanding? S209, an act to restrict young persons' online access to pornographic material. Let's just read the intro. Sounds good on the surface, right? The enactment makes it an offense for organizations to make pornographic material available to young persons on the internet. It also enables a designated enforcement authority to take steps to prevent pornographic material from being made available to young persons on the internet in Canada. They can choose to self-sterilize, but we should definitely make sure that they can be protected from this. Doomed to fail, because if a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old can make decisions that lead to their sterilization, if they can handle that kind of decision-making ability with one signature from an activist doctor, the argument kind of makes itself that they should be able to choose who they love and they should be able to choose what they view. I'm telling you, that's coming. An act respecting Ukrainian Heritage Month. It's kind of self-explanatory. We don't even need to get into that. That's great, making sure that we virtue signal to the Ukrainian diaspora and Zelensky. An act respecting a national framework on sports betting advertising. It's interesting. Let's just see here, actually. This enactment provides for the development of a national framework to regulate sports betting advertising in Canada and to set national standards for the prevention of risk for persons negatively impacted. It also provides for the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission to review its regulations and policies to assess their adequacy and effectiveness in reducing incidents of harms resulting from the proliferation of sports betting advertising. I will say, in defense of this, I find it quite offensive when I do sit down to watch a hockey game with my son, which, in spite of all of my problems with the NHL, I have to say the advertising these days is a lot less woke than it used to be. And I do have to say that I don't think the game itself, in spite of its commercialized flaws and in spite of people booing national anthems and doing stupid things, I don't think the game's ever been better. I think it's the best game of hockey that's ever been produced is the game of hockey that's being played right now. And you can call me stupid, you can call me whatever you want for wanting to watch hockey, but I grew up with my dad on the weekends, Saturdays. I was with Mom 5 days a week, I was with Dad 2 days a week, and those Saturdays watching the hockey game with Dad were some of the most precious things I ever did. Not to mention the Sundays watching the OHL games, if we could get it in on the rabbit ears. Some of the people that are watching this will not remember rabbit ears. We used to have to manually tune our TVs. I digress. So the playoffs are on now. Edmonton's trying for the cup. I really like Draisaitl. I think he's just I think McDavid's one of the best players, if not the best player that's ever hit the ice, but I just like Draisaitl's moxie. I like watching that man play hockey. But there's a proliferation of sports betting advertising that normalizes really toxic behavior, and it's being fed to my kids. Now, generally speaking, my son doesn't pay much attention to hockey, so he's usually up and down and gone, whatever, and I mute the commercials and do what I can, and he's not really paying attention. He doesn't know what betting is. But the fact is, there's impressionable teenagers watching this all the time. They have smartphones, and sports betting's harmful too. But in another vein, all the things I've talked about in this video, the things that minors can consent to and do to themselves, sports betting's probably not as bad as self-sterilization. An act respecting National Immigration Month, that's S215, because as the media loves to tell us, immigration is good for you, even when it's bad for you. You must love it. There is no alternative. You can't lower it. You can't actually honestly deal with the reality of the harms caused by mass immigration and the harms caused to all Canadians of every ethnic background who have been here for generations by mass immigration, not bringing in skilled people, but mass importing TFWs and people on student visas that are abusing the system and rich people who are looking to launder money and all the bad things that happen. No, we just have to celebrate unconditionally National Immigration Month. An act to amend the Constitution, Act 1982. I don't even need to look at this to know what this is all about. The enactment amends the Constitution, Act 1982, to provide for conditions that must be met in order for Parliament to enact legislation that invokes Section 33 of the Act. This is probably never going to pass. I mean, we'll find out. But this is largely in response to provincial leaders outside of Quebec, because whenever Quebec uses the notwithstanding clause, I think they've used it 12 times, nobody raises or bats an eyelash. But now that other premiers have used it or are talking about using it, it's a great big crisis. We probably should eliminate it altogether so that there is no freedom for the provinces. An act to amend the Canada Elections Act and the regulation adapting the Canada Elections Act for the purpose of a referendum. Again, let's just read the intro. The enactment amends the Canada Elections Act and the regulation adapting the Canada Elections Act for the purposes of a referendum to extend the right to vote to citizens aged 16 and 17. So this is the push to lower the voting age down. Why? Because the youth are the most easily indoctrinated. Now, this could backfire Because the younger you get in Canada these days, the more conservative you get and the more sick and tired the people in question are of the prevailing politics. It's actually the 65 plus age cohort, and again, an exemption to all the millions who get it. Many of you watch my channel. You get it. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the millions that you're outnumbered by who voted Liberal and have kept the chains on everybody that's working and paying taxes and are younger. So this could backfire because the youth have a tendency to rebel against reigning paradigms. It is not guaranteed that they're all going to be ranting and raging leftists. But I digress. The objective here is manipulation of the electorate. Anyway, this is what your parliament is up to in Canada. Well, we're all distracted by all the other things. There's a lot more going on. There's more bills than this. Would you like to hear more about these bills? Would you like me to read them and go through them and parse them for you and then put that out into a format? Would anybody watch that? I have no idea. The other thing, and the thing I'll finish on, is the Elon Musk-Donald Trump dispute over the big, beautiful bill, which is started with Elon Musk highlighting that a bill cannot be both big and beautiful at the same time. It can be one or the other. It can't be both. But what's kind of lost is the Trump fan base that believes he cannot do any wrong have dispelled their reason in their assessment of this bill. The AI provisions are really disturbing. The breadth, 10 years of those provisions being in power is enough that AI will advance beyond anything any of us can think about right now. It's a huge, draconian, maybe draconian is not the right word. It is a dystopian level of AI unleashment. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just thinking about the things I could say, because this video is getting long already. But the predominant point is people really need to be reasonable and be on their toes when it comes to Donald Trump, too. The American Constitution can be a thing of great beauty, which I admire. I can compare it to the Canadian Federation, and I can recognize its superiority. But America, its system, its Constitution, is separate from the people who occupy the positions laid out in that document. Contrary to popular belief, Donald Trump is fallible. And you should probably maintain your reason. If you want to be helpful to the administration, if you want to be helpful to Donald Trump, if you want to be helpful to the objectives that you think you voted for, if you didn't just vote along team lines, if you actually care about the record American deficit, the interest alone on the American debt is more than the entire spending on the American military, which strides the entire world. That should concern everybody. It certainly seemed to concern Trump every single year going back to 2012 and before, where he talked about it. And now this bill increases the debt limit by $5 trillion, keeps all the deficit spending, and doesn't do anything about the core structural problems that America faces. If you're a true friend to Donald Trump, if you're a true friend to the things that he stood for, you should be unafraid to level some criticism. That's what a friend does. A friend tells you the truth. And that's what I aim to do on this channel. And oftentimes it's not well received. But I'm just going to keep doing it anyway until there's absolutely no audience for it. I'm Frank Vaughn. And if you value that, please consider supporting me via the website. I'll see you in the next one.